evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Committee of the Whole meeting of the DeKalb City Council, October 28th, 2019. Prior to our roll call this evening, I would like to indicate, as usual, if anyone would like to speak to any item on the agenda. There are only two considerations for this Committee of the Whole meeting. To kindly fill out a speaker request form, give it to our City Clerk, Lynn Fazekas. She'll get it to me, and we'll get you on at the appropriate time. You may speak under item C, public participation, or during one of the considerations D, 1 or 2. With that being said, if the clerk would please call the roll, please.
Morris.
Here.
Finucane.
Here.
Smith.
Here.
McAdams.
Here.
Verbic.
Here.
Favor.
Here.
Mayor Smith.
Here.
7 present.
I might add, for those of you who are watching at home, I am told that we are live and on Channel 14 and on TV tonight. We thank Jeremy Alexander, our IT director, and through the cooperation of some work with the folks over at NIU, Northern Illinois University, we have the proper piece that we needed on the replacement for the one that was burnt out during a power outage several weeks ago. So we should be good to go. I'm told that there may be a few differences for those of you who watch it regularly from what you've seen in the past, but for the most part, we're live on our TV tonight. So I now go to item B on the agenda, approval of the agenda. Are there any additions or deletions to tonight's Committee of the Whole? If not, I entertain a motion to approve tonight's agenda.
So moved. Second.
It's been moved by Alderman Smith, seconded by Alderman Favor. Discussion? Roll call, please.
Morris.
Yes.
Finucane.
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
McAdams.
Yes.
Verbic.
Yes.
Favor.
Yes.
Mayor Smith.
Yes.
7 aye.
Thank you. We do have one individual who would like to speak to public participation during this meeting, and that is Dwayne Brown.
Dwayne Brown. The Finance Advisory Committee is recommending a 4% decrease in the property tax levy. The 2019 rate was 1.188330 with an EAV of $547,947,687 with a levy collection of $6,510,857 to the city. The proposed 1.1403% rate option, based on an estimated EAV of $592,785,395 and a city levy of $6,759,723. It captures new construction and 2% of the new EAV growth. We have a funding gap of $2,452,755 for capital projects and equipment. Some of the options the Finance Advisory Committee is having the city consider is a 1.2% tax rate and the $7 million tax levy, a quarter-point home rule sales tax increase, or a fuel tax increase of up to 4%. We need to keep our revenue fund at 25% of the annual expenditures to maintain a good bond rating from Moody's. I know we have 25 miles of streets that need immediate repair to prevent further deterioration, but don't increase the gas tax and make us less competitive with neighboring cities like Sycamore. The 19-cent increase in the state motor fuel tax will generate $500,000 for DeKalb in fiscal year 2020. Don't increase the property tax rate to 1.2% in 2020. We are second only to New Jersey in the highest property taxes in the country. That would only compound the problem. Please don't even consider a sales tax increase. The 1 3/4% current home rule sales tax is equal to Sycamore and second only to Carpentersville at 2% of the cities established by Sikich accounting firm for comparison. This would make us uncompetitive with neighboring cities such as Genoa, Malta, Creston, which have a 6 1/4% sales tax rate, and Mendota, which has 6.5%, Virgil, Wasco, Wakanda, and Wayne, who have a 7% rate, and Shabada and Waterman, who have 7 1/4% rate. And Rochelle has 7%. Cortland is 7 3/4. I know we need a $150,000 dump truck and 3 new police SUVs totaling $165,000 and more money for streets, but don't place this $2.4 million budget gap on the backs of the taxpayers. The solution is more industry, jobs, and growth of businesses in DeKalb. That can be achieved by not raising taxes. Thank you.
Thank you, Dwayne. Okay, now we move along to considerations. We have 2 tonight during the Committee of the Whole. Number 1, consideration of the annual property tax levy in the city of DeKalb, and number 2, capital funding sources. Beginning with number 1, our city manager, Bill Nicholas. Any background? You've given us quite a bit of information.
I did. There's a lot of meat. Is this working? Good. There's a lot of meat in your background, and partly because of that and because of the time constraints, we're going to try to cover a lot of ground in an hour. I'm going to be fairly spare in my presentation and be happy to answer any questions you may have. You have a variety of charts and graphs, probably been numbed by the numbers, and we haven't even started the budget review yet. So to focus us tonight, I'm going to begin where Dwayne began, actually, and halfway in, I thought we were entirely in agreement, Dwayne, and you did a very good job of presenting the fact that we have some good news. Our citywide EAV did increase, and it increased by about $44 million that's our estimate anyway, in 2019. And part of that is, about $19 million of that is owing to a one-time benefit that we get from closing TIF 2, and then we have this interesting, almost anomalous situation where we have a TIF 3 that exists but is not yet going to be in a position to allocate dollars until after January 1st. In effect, it's starting to bleed through TIF 1. And TIF 1, underneath where these particular TIF 3 parcels are, is going to go away, but not before the benefit of TIF 1, and so far as raising the base EAV from 1985 to 2017 is concerned, will impact our EAV. So that's all good. Very quickly, I gave you a rundown of where we were in 2019 in terms of the allocations of tax rate across all the various taxing bodies, and a little bit of a background for readers and persons looking in with respect to how the property tax rate is determined annually. I know I don't have to remind the council, but as a matter of general information, the city has a 5-year financial plan, and the principal thrust of that was to stabilize the general fund. So one piece of that was to make sure that the property tax rate remains level or slightly falling as we grow. Another piece of that Dwayne mentioned earlier was to secure an annual reserve that was equal to 25% of the projected expenditures out of the general operating fund. So let's see where we are on the tax levy options that were presented to you. And Jeff, you should have those to spin up, I hope. If not, the council has copies of them in front of you. And the option that was reviewed by the Finance Advisory Committee with staff input and ultimately recommended by the Finance Advisory Committee is option number 2, and that's printed in its entirety with a lot of background information on page 3 of your agenda tonight for the COW. And what would that bring? Well, it's an actual levy of $6,759,723. That's an increase of $248,866 over last year's levy. But as we have grown the denominator, so to speak, we are in a position to see if this was chosen by the council as we had recommended and the Finance Advisory Committee had recommended, should be a reduction in our actual rate of about 4%. The council and our residents and businesses are prone to ask, just as we are at the staff level, what does this mean for the average fill-in-the-blank, homeowner, business owner, and so forth? It's impossible to predict that accurately. We don't know, for instance, if there was, say, a reassessment in a certain subdivision or a certain neighborhood that has been happening in recent years. We don't know if a particular property owner has added a porch or added something that would increase the EAV of their particular property. But we're guessing that even with 2% inflation, if that actually gets baked in to the Supervisor of Assessments evaluation for our community, we should see a slightly smaller rate for our taxpayers in terms of the city tax rate. And that is leadership, I think. I think that's where the council was aiming. Originally, we started at the staff level with the thought that option number one would be better, because option number one covers both sides of the concerns that are in the Finance Advisory Committee's recommendations in the financial plan. And one is to keep level tax rate or slightly falling if we can, and then that 25% threshold. That option number one would have kept us at the 25% threshold. So let me skip ahead very quickly to where we started in 2019, where we find ourselves today, but where we're likely to, if all things play out, we spend every dollar that the council allocates and we bring in every dollar that we estimate, we're projecting that we're going to start to fall off of that 25%. And why is that? And it's something that's not new to you, it's not new to us on the staff level or within our organization or in our community, and that is that there is a pension crisis in Illinois, not a new thing for us to consider. A lot of very good people are working on that. And as I said in the background, there is some very promising collaboration going on at the state level right now where most of the answers are going to have to be found. But there's still work to do by the legislature. There's a veto session. We'll take up some pieces of this, and hopefully in the spring, in a regular session, we'll see some other pieces brought before them. As it stands now, though, we are looking at the fact that, and I also handed you a little black and white show, we have a ramp that has been in place and continues to rise with respect to our levy funding and our obligations. And it's, I only did 2 years, and you can see it's illustrative. It basically doubles in terms of the chunk and percent increase on an annual basis. And this affects in particular our fire and police pensions. And even if we allocate, ultimately we have to allocate the statutory actuarial requirements for our two pension funds. But it's been a number of years since we've had enough property tax on an annual basis to cover that obligation. So we've had to go to other funds, which in effect are a pressure on that reserve balance. So whether you actually took it out of the reserve or you just didn't have enough money at the end of the year to declare a surplus that would go into the reserve, it comes to the same thing. And even with some mighty restraint on the part of spending and maintaining constant services, I think that's the key here. We see at the end of the year that we're going to start to drop off again. And I do believe that the answer is growth. We have been, as a community, as a staff, working mightily to attract some very large industrial prospects to our community. We've also been working with you, and the community's been working with us together to help redevelop the downtown. But all these things are not going to come to pass in terms of new dollars for our organization in the next year, maybe even the next 2 years. So that is what's before you tonight. We have a proposed levy number 2 option, which will address the concerns about the tax rate. It still falls short by about $300,000 to hit that marker of 25%. So I'll stop here with that, and before we get into the capital piece, I'd like to hear your thoughts. We certainly would like a recommendation from the council and the mayor tonight, because we're nearly across the stream when it comes to preparing a draft budget for your consideration in about 2 weeks, and that's a key component of the assumptions we have to make.
Following our October 21 meeting with the Finance Advisory Committee, it was a 5-to-1 recommendation of the Finance Advisory Committee after considerable discussion that option number 2, which is being recommended by staff and by the Finance Advisory Committee, moving forward to the council. As I turn it over to any comments or discussion, I think what I've just heard our city manager ask us is some consensus, if you will. I don't know if we'll need a vote unless you recommend that, Bill. If there's just some consensus that the recommendation of option number 2 might make the most sense. So with that, any comments on the city manager and the Finance Advisory Committee's recommendation? Alderman Morris.
So what are the fundamental, can you hear me? What are the fundamental differences we're looking at here between the 2 options? I'm seeing, in your final difference column, substantial differences between like pensions and library. However, bottom line is the same. Yes?
You're talking about maybe option number 1 and option number 2?
Yes.
So it's in the arithmetic, let's say. If we get a little more in the way of levy, we can pay off a little more of the fire and police pension obligations with property tax. If we don't, then we pay off a little less, and we have to use more sales and use taxes, or we end up at the end of the year with a shortfall in terms of the balance between revenue and expenditure, and that either way is a pressure on the reserve balance. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so fundamentally, option 2 reduces the taxes by 4%, just like Dwayne Brown suggested, and
Yeah.
makes up for that elsewhere in an alternative that we're going to discuss as we move forward in this conversation, right?
Well, what number 2 does is good news for the taxpayer. It's almost certain, unless there is a higher than expected general inflationary increase in EAV across the community or in particular neighborhoods and so forth, allowing for that inflation increase. We should see a tax rate that's going to fall on the tax bill that's going to provide a savings or certainly no increase in the amount of city tax. Of course, there are other taxing bodies that will come into play here, and we don't control their levies. The other side of that, though, is we will have less money than in option number 2 than option number 1 to apply against other obligations we have, such as the pension obligation. So we're going to use more sales and use tax or other revenues to offset that.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Carolyn, that answered your question.
I should just say to Carolyn, we'd really be skating on the line with that option number 1. We kind of knew that going in. We wanted to hit both bogeys at once, keep that rate level, and hit the 25%, as we said before the Finance Advisory Committee. But they said, I think they were wise to say this, any inflation increase is going to wipe away that little spare gap that we had.
Okay, before we move on to the second consideration for tonight, capital funding, i.e. streets and fleet, can I assume that there is consensus that we accept the recommendation for option number 2 for our property tax levy?
Can I just ask another question? Sorry.
Alderman Favor.
So one of the discussions we've had in the past is levying a higher amount, which might be option 1, and then reducing the rate at a later date. But we have to have, by the end of the year, we have to have the levy amount in. But in the future, we could lower that amount. Is that correct? We could lower the rate?
Other, like the school district has some different rules to play by, the PTEL rules and so forth. Once we provide that levy, it gets certified. We can't go in and start meddling with the levy. It's done.
Right.
And that defines the rate based on the community-wide EAV. I mean, you've made your commitment. You can't just cherry-pick the rate because it's built on those other 2 factors. And the county can't control that. You control that. So,
And at option 2, we are $300,000 less than our full
Yeah.
25% funding.
now, here's the good news, and I can't sit here and forthrightly guarantee this. I can say that I'll use all of my wit and my staff's experience to make this happen. This year, we, through fiscal constraint, found at least that much money to dedicate toward the overall fund balance, and it worked. We also had the benefit of a couple one-time adjustments, but can't say that happens, is going to keep happening. And of course, there were some major staff reductions, and we don't have any more department heads to give. We have to have a police chief and a fire chief. Right. So,
Thank you.
Any other? Well, Bill, I think you have the consensus that option 2
Thank
is
you.
the workable.
thank you very much.
Consideration for the annual property tax levy. Now let's move on to streets and fleet, capital
Okay.
funding. Any comments?
Just one last thing on the levy. Thanks to you and your confidence in how we've been managing things, that we got to this point where we're able to look at possibly reducing the tax impact rather than saying, give us more, give us more. I thank you for your support through some interesting challenges in this fiscal year. Okay. Here's another interesting challenge. Let's start on the street side, because from our residents' viewpoint and from the viewpoint of our businesses, it's the streets. Sidewalks are important, alleys are important, but it's the streets that they need to travel to work, to volunteer commitments, to schools and so forth. And we made a dent on some well-traveled routes last year, but it was a small dent. The forward-looking assessments that were made just a year ago about the number of miles of streets that we'd have to fix, I think are still pretty much in play, because we did about 2.5 miles last year, and we were supposed to do about 25 a year just to keep up, and we weren't anywhere near that, obviously. And I proposed a pretty aggressive street repair program, as you see in the background here, added another $1 million, basically, where we're going to have to spend down some reserves, and not in the general fund, but in the capital side, to try to do that, because it's hard to do half of North 7th Street. It's hard to do half of 14th or 13th, or North 1st Street this year. We of course talked about that. We had different budgets, but you decided, I think wisely, let's do it right. Let's go the length. But that eats up a lot of money. We don't have many options for funding those those programs, the street repair programs. And then there's the fleet side. So we're not talking here about turning over pickup trucks every 3 years and fire trucks every 10. We're talking about trying to make a dent through some funding, a backlog of over $4 million, $4.3 million was the estimate a year ago. I don't think that's changed much because deterioration continues. So how do we do that? Gave the Finance Advisory Committee 3 options. No one on the Finance Advisory Committee was in favor of, after having talked about the levy, going back in the property tax purse and trying to use that money to repair streets and enhance our fleet. The same is true of the home rule sales tax, which was not selected as an option. Don't have too many other options unless we found another new revenue source, and there isn't one on the horizon that we're aware of. And so we suggested 4 cents on the local fuel tax, not the motor fuel tax, which we can't touch. That's a state shared revenue. And it's true that at the pump we have experienced another 19 cents from the state level. You ask yourself, are people going to pass by a DeKalb fuel station to go to Sycamore for that 4 cents? I don't know. We didn't talk about that at length at the Finance Advisory Committee. I doubt for the 4 cents that would be the case. But then we don't have $4 gasoline right now. So it's a tough choice. We've just put it to you fairly baldly. If we're going to make a dent, we're going to need a little more revenue, because we can't save ourselves into more revenue for the fleet, trucks, and equipment, a little bit of equipment that we need every year to ding at. So we've recommended that 4 cent hike, and we're eager to know what you think.
Again, this seemed to be consensus with the Finance Advisory Committee.
Yeah, they didn't take a vote on it.
Yeah.
There were a couple of different ideas that were being kicked around.
Right.
So, yeah.
There didn't seem to be a lot of pushback. I was at that
No.
meeting, and so let's turn it over to any discussion. Alderman in favor.
In terms of the roads, as an alderman, you get all kinds of spam mail. So one of the ones that I received was something about some sort of a overcoat or something you'd put on the road surfacing. Have we looked at any other than, I know the crack sealing, which I'm glad to see that we're actually doing that, because I think that does help prolong the roads. Have we looked at any other new technologies or anything in terms of
and
preserve or
some of it,
prolong?
some of it's not new, but maybe we haven't used it around here that much, and partly that's because we've waited too long. There's a certain point, for instance, like even crack filling, you can continue to do that even if you've never done it in the first 10 years. You can do it to some effect, but the cracks are too deep for it to really last. They tend to bump out. You can do crack filling anywhere from the first year through the 5th year and stay with it, but then that's a lot of crack filling every year. We've done a couple of things on North First Street this year. We spent a little extra money, but we put a mat down. And it happened so fast, they were working so fast here, you maybe didn't see it, but if you were up on Peace Road about a week or 2 ago, it looked like about a 18-inch wide sheet of glass that was going up the new lanes that were up around 64 and Peace, north and south of there. That covers the seams. It's almost like doing drywall. You wouldn't just put mud on the drywall seams because it would crack, but you put some type of a webbing down, or paper at least. And so the technology has improved on that. The webbing, if you will, is the mesh is more durable, and that helps seal the roads. A slurry is used by some communities. There's one not too far from here that uses that pretty aggressively. That could be anywhere from a 2.5 to a 5 year life, but it's not going to last that long. It really depends on how much truck traffic you have and so forth. It's better for quieter residential streets, but that's also a possibility. And again, there's some improvement in the product that's available there. But once you get past that, so you've done the crack filling, and that's not holding the line, and then you do the slurry, or maybe something else, then you're in the position of having to resurface, hopefully just 1 2-inch layer, final lift, and if that doesn't work, you're getting now down into the base, and it's hard to bring that up without starting to take up some of the road bed, and now you've got, if you can do 1 block of our downtown street, and if you did curb, gutter, surface, and fix the road bed, that'd be $1 million, 1 block. So we can't operate like that. We have to be more aggressive up front. What I've proposed is going to be more aggressive. You see, if you add up the numbers, the street number doesn't add up to the total because we would do a lot more crack filling and some of these smaller approaches, less expensive approaches, I should say. I think it's the only way to go. We are, in some cases, losing roads, and we don't have them anywhere near the means to repair them. If we only focus on the ones we're losing, then we're going to start losing more roads. We have to do something. So we're only adding $1 million this year. With the growth that we're hoping for, we may be able to stake another $1 million in a year and a half or so. That would be terrific.
Any other questions or comments? Alderman Fanouken.
Yeah, Bill, in the back of it talks about the local fuel tax increase and how about some of those dollars might be spent on Barb City Manor. I thought the Illinois Lockbox Amendment said that things could only
Yeah.
be spent on transportation from any kind of a motor fuel tax.
That shouldn't be in your, where are you, Bill?
I'm looking on the printout that you gave us on the last page under the local fuel tax increase. Page 9 of 9 on the printed materials.
Page what, Bill?
9
Yeah.
of 9.
Yeah, well, that's the city manager's fault because I think when I did a cut and paste, remember that was one of the things that we showed the joint meeting of the Finance Advisory Committee and the council on August 16th, and we had some discussion about that, determined that we weren't going to do that. So there's a paragraph in the cloud someplace that was supposed to be here. It's the same basic explanation, except I meant to excise that piece. So we have no intention of using it for that purpose.
Thank you.
Thank you for pointing that out.
So, Bill, would you kindly read that paragraph the way it should be?
Yeah, you just take out that third sentence.
The reference to Barb City
Yeah,
Manor?
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yep.
And, Bill, does that satisfy your
Yes,
question there?
sir, thank you.
Okay.
Until we discovered, after consulting our attorney, that between now and the end of the year, if we set up an escrow fund with the TIF $2 that we had hoped to spend at Barb City Manor, we can continue to spend out of that escrow
Okay.
for that backlog. That covers us. That should have fallen off. My fault.
Okay. Any other discussion? Are you looking for consensus on this consideration also,
I am.
City Manager Nicholas? Does there seem to be consensus that the local fuel tax increase would be the best option? Yes, Bill?
Actually, I'm very comfortable with it. You know, we did this a couple of years ago, and we ended up a 2-cent increase at that point, and there was no noticeable difference between price of gas in DeKalb and Sycamore at that time after we made that change. I think that would continue. Obviously, with the largest single gas tax supplier here in town being the Oasis, we do capture a lot of out-of-town dollars rather than
Yes,
just on the
I
backs of
remember
our
that.
residents. So, thank
Yeah.
you.
Okay, do I hear you see a lot of hands shaking affirmatively? Okay, so
Thank
that,
you.
you've got consensus on that consideration.
Thank you.
Is there any other business for the good of the cause under our committee of the whole meeting? If not, I would entertain a motion to adjourn this committee of the whole.
So moved.
Second?
Been moved by Alderman Fanouken, seconded by Alderman Favor. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Oppose? We are adjourned. City Council meeting starts promptly at 6 o'clock.